Hello Roseville educators. This is a brief assessment overview that we hope supports the instruction and assessment decisions in your classroom this year. This video will discuss the connection between instructional design and formative and summative assessment and address providing students with multiple types of assessment over the span of your course. We stated earlier that 90% of a student's grade should be summative and only 10% of the grade should be based on formative assessment. That doesn't mean that our complete focus is only on summative assessment. It just means the focus of our judgments on learning are focused on those pieces of evidence that are summative. In fact, you should be and most likely are doing more formative assessment than summative assessment. It's just that formative assessments are typically not graded. Many of you that I have worked with over the years during our curriculum review meetings have seen this diagram. It's from Understanding by Design by Wiggins and McTee and their focus on backwards design. In their book, they make the case that educators should be thinking like assessors and not just activity designers. We need to focus on what evidence we want our students to be able to demonstrate to show that they have learned. Wiggins and McTee also know that we can't teach everything. In Robert Marzano's research and calculations, he concludes that to effectively teach all of our standards, students would be in school not from K through 12, but in a K through 22 system. That's why we need to identify our power standards. We added a definition in our PLC glossary document before the pandemic that states this. Power standards are the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that have endurance and leverage, and are essential in preparing students for readiness at the next level, the most essential learning or outcomes. This aligns with Wiggins and McTee's work. They call them the big ideas and understandings and are found in the middle circle. These are the focus of our power standards, and we must find our best evidence to assess for these power standards. In the wider circle are the things that are important to know and do. These things are taught alongside our standards, but probably not to the level of mastery. And finally, we have the things that are worth being familiar with. These things help to build the context for students around our power standards. Wiggins and McTee further explain that our assessment choices must align to our curricular choices. The evidence of student learning needs to match the in-depth requirements of our power standards. They recommend that our choices for assessment and our power standards should be things like performance tasks and projects, things that require deeper learning and deeper thinking. Now, what these are depend on your subject area. Some of these are more closely aligned to your subject area, and some require more in-depth discussion with your colleagues about what this looks like. The important to know and do, and the worth being familiar with, are more appropriately matched with assessment choices that include quizzes and tests. Assessments are on a continuum, and we know that they provide different evidence of learning and ways for students to show their evidence of learning. When you move to the right of this line, you find that there is more depth of knowledge required of our students to show their learning. Some of the more typical and traditional areas are obviously the tests and quizzes, but we also have more ways of assessing students on the left side that include observations, dialogue, and checks for understanding. More of these are probably what you use for formative assessments in class. And as we move toward the middle and right of the continuum, we find more in the area of summative assessments. What I want you to reflect on now is, which of these do I incorporate in my teaching and learning? Or, for folks outside of the classroom, what do you see when you're walking through classrooms or talking with students? You'll have some time after the video to read about the different assessment types on this continuum and discuss them with your colleagues on your collaborative team. Formative assessments inform instruction and are typically not used to assign grades. These are assessments for learning, for students and the teacher. They are typically given prior to learning or to gauge student progress during instruction. You should be using common formative assessments with your collaborative teams to discuss what instructional strategies are working in your classroom, how well students are progressing, and to be able to share and collaborate with your colleagues. In a video by John Hattie that we shared a few years ago, he discusses the biggest impact on learning, which is collective teacher efficacy. This is about how teachers work together to define high expectations for what students should be learning and sharing about how they're getting there while monitoring student growth. It's about educators sharing their instructional practices that worked and didn't work. Taken all together, it's collaboration and professional development. Summative assessments occur at the end of learning, at the unit, course, or trimester level. They take place after the instruction occurs and typically report the final results of student learning. They are assessments of learning. When you align your formative assessments with your summative assessments, the student achievement data you can glean from your formative assessments can provide predictors of eventual success or non-success. When you design the summative assessment prior to the instruction, you are using backwards design and beginning with the end in mind, thinking about the evidence that students should be able to show that they have learned. Summative assessment should assess the learning that occurred and not be used as an accountability tool for students. Calling an assignment an assessment or a summative assessment just so that students will complete it isn't an appropriate use of summative assessments. This quote from Robert Stake may help you think about the formative and summative assessments. When the cook tastes the soup, that's formative. When the guests taste the soup, that's summative. After the screencast, you will have time to reflect on your assessment choices and consider what you provide to students along the continuum of assessment. With your collaborative team, reflect on these questions. What patterns do you notice in your assessment choices? Are you collecting appropriate evidence for all the desired results, or only those that are easiest to test and grade? Is an important learning goal falling through the cracks because it's not being assessed? I will end the video with a quote from Lorna Earle's book, Assessment as Learning. Learning is not a linear process. Assessment doesn't come at the end. Teaching is not the filling in the sandwich between curriculum and assessment. Taken together, curriculum, teaching, learning, and assessment interact in an iterative and sometimes cyclical process. They feed into one another and sometimes dart back and forth in seemingly unpredictable patterns. This does not mean that they are independent or disconnected from one another. On the contrary, the interconnections are key. Curriculum, teaching, and assessment all need to be consistent for effective learning. Thanks for watching and for your participation today.